interesting, if controversial, genre. Its merits widely discussed and widely disagreed upon. I'm almost certainly going to play fast and loose with its definition in this video in a way that probably most people would disagree with, but I kind of consider that par for the course when talking about horror. See, outside of the realm of scary creatures and psycho killers, qu'est-ce que c'est? There's a whole other world of horror that lies in the emotional and the philosophical. Though I am going to be talking about murderers and demons in this video, what I'm more interested in is how horror intersects with love. The stories where it saves everyone, the stories where it fails, and the stories where it was never there at all. This is probably going to be a long one, so get cozy, dim the lights. Let's talk about Aster and Stephen King. I chose these two in particular because they're both sort of obsessed with horror that stems from love, and yet their approaches to this end up being very different. Arguably, all horror is preoccupied with these themes, but I also think it's interesting to compare a veritable king, pun intended, of the genre to a relative newcomer. Also, I'm a bit of a King head, and I just rewatched all of Ari Aster's feature films at the cinema, so it felt pertinent. Oh, Jesus. Ah. You were going on the floor. It would be easy enough to talk about Ari Aster's entire filmography, but doing that with Stephen King would be a nightmare in and of itself. So I'm narrowing it down to 2 works each. For Ari Aster, we're looking at Hereditary, his feature-length debut about demonic family trauma, and his most recent 3-hour epic, Beau is Afraid, which I'm already kind of dreading having to recap. For good old Steve, I'm going just a little out of genre bounds and talking about The Body, probably best known for its adaptation into Stand By Me, and also The Shining, which needs no introduction. It's important to note that though both The Body and The Shining have more famous film counterparts, I'm specifically talking about the books in this video, which both differ pretty wildly in tone and theme from the movies, so please keep that in mind. I will, however, be using clips from the movies throughout, because this is a video essay, and books don't make for very good visuals. Okay, time to look at The Body. I will, however, be using clips from the movies throughout, because this is a video essay, and books don't make for very good visuals. Okay, time to look at The Body. Love has teeth. They bite. The wounds never close. No word, no combination of words can close those love bites. It's the other way around. That's the joke. So I feel like I kind of have to defend this being horror. Thanks for fucking nothing, Rob Reiner. I don't mean that. I have a lot of love for Rob Reiner, but now I have to justify having what I believe to be a reasonable position. The Body has since been published as a standalone novella, but it was first published alongside Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, Apt Pupil, and Breathing Method in Different Seasons, King's non-horror novella collection. Hence the name being Different Seasons. Because it's different than what he usually does. Despite it being marketed and gimmicked as non-horror, King admits himself in the afterword of Different Seasons that this is sort of a false equivalence. All of the stories in Different Seasons contain some element of horror that King singles out in the afterword. The Body is a horror in the sense that there is disturbing imagery, particularly with the description of the body itself. But more importantly to me, it's horror because of the feelings it evokes. For those unfamiliar, The Body is set in the fictional town of Castle Rock, Maine. It was Oregon in the movie, but it's Maine in the book. Thank you very much. In 1958, and is about Gordy LaChance, a young boy who recently lost his brother going on a 2-day walk with his friends Chris, Teddy, and Vern to find the body of another boy who was killed walking on the train lines. How are they going to find him? They're going to walk on the train lines. The story is told from the perspective of 34-year-old Gordy looking back on this life-changing summer as an adult. Before the end of the book, Gordy explicitly tells us that in the present, Chris is dead. One of King's favorite little foreshadowing tricks. I'm serious, read any King book, I almost guarantee there's going to be a character whose death is announced before it's shown. Even before that, by the time it's revealed, it's already obvious that Chris is dead. Gordy dreams about them both drowning and him being unable to save Chris. His coin flip is unlucky. He catches up with Vern and Teddy before Gordy can catch up with him. From early on, you get a sense that Chris is dead. But before the climax of the book, you know for sure. Anyway, Gordy's brother Danny died in 1957, and his parents have been off ever since. They don't really acknowledge Gordy, they don't really care about him. Danny was their golden boy, and now that he's gone, they're sort of uninterested in their other son. Gordy liked his brother fine, but he's not very torn up about his death. More than that, he's upset about how his parents are suddenly treating him, or more accurately, not treating him. All of the boys have in some way a strained relationship with their family. Vern is relentlessly bullied by his older brother. Teddy's father left his ear permanently ruined after holding his face to the stove. And Chris's father is an abusive alcoholic. His older brothers aren't any better, and he's the one responsible for looking after his younger brothers. Along with Chris, it's revealed before the end that Vern and Teddy are also dead, and Gordy is the only one who made it to 34. The film changes this, of course. Gordy being the sole survivor was just slightly too dark for a coming-of-age film. Gordy is the protagonist of the body, but the story is really about Chris Chambers. The thing is that Gordy and Chris are different from the others. Vern and Teddy are their friends, but they're also kind of stupid. Both so easily destined to take high school shop classes and stay in Castle Rock of their lives that it's not even a question. That's what's expected of Chris as well, due to the infamy of the Chambers family, but it's not what he wants. The Chambers are violent and cruel and uninterested in being anything else. But Chris is sensitive, hardworking, and above all else, incredibly kind. He's mature in a way that even Gordy isn't. He's aware of his place in the world and of his own doom. He sees in Gordy some chance, some spark, like he knows he's going somewhere. Gordy is a talented writer and a bright kid, and Chris sees this, and in a speech that Matt Damon and Ben Affleck almost certainly likely ripped off from Good Will Hunting, demands that he does something with it. Chris makes sure that Gordy takes the college classes in high school, rather than subjecting himself to shop classes for the sake of being with his friends. Gordy, in turn, makes sure that Chris joins him there, pushes him to work as hard as he possibly can to, against all odds, make it through the college classes all the way to pre-law. But of course, Chris dies. I think I disagree with Stephen King. The horror of the body isn't the body itself. The imagery is disturbing, sure, momentarily frightening, but it isn't what sticks with you. When you read The Body, especially if you've seen Stand By Me, you go in expecting one thing. You're set up for this beautiful, rootable, coming-of-age story, a fun if tragic romp for all ages. But slowly it starts to dawn on you, a weighing, sickening horror, the closer you and the boys draw to the titular body. The knowledge you've been piecing together from the very beginning. Chris isn't going to make it. Every new thing you learn about him makes this reality all the harder to bear. The more time you spend with him, the more time you see how desperately he wants to get out, how failed he's been by everyone in his life, how much he deserves to get out. And every moment of kindness, of sympathy, of sadness, of love that Chris expresses is like a knife to the chest, because you've always known. Just like Chris has always known, he isn't going to make it. That, to me, is more horrifying than any monster, or killer, or corpse. There is a lack of love in the body, from Gordy's parents and Chris's family, but it barely registers in the face of the love that Gordy and Chris have for each other. The love itself is the horror. If Chris and Gordy didn't love each other as much as they did, then Chris dying would be tragic, but it wouldn't be gut-wrenching. Their love for each other is, to me, the thing that pushes the body into horror. Because I truly don't have other words to describe what it feels like to read The Body other than horrifying. Love doesn't save anyone in the body. Everyone's stories end the way they were always going to. They were always just pawns in this horrible, hopeless machine. That is the horror of the body. That you can love someone and they can still be doomed. You love them anyway, but it won't help anyone. And yet you love them anyway. But see that you get on. That's your job in this hard world. To keep your love alive and see that you get on, no matter what. Pull your act together and just go on. I'm going to repeat again that I am only talking about the book. The Shining and The Shining are, on the surface, pretty similar, but as far as I'm concerned, the stories they tell are pretty much entirely unrelated for reasons I can't get into without someone calling me a fake cinephile. This is obviously a much more traditional horror story. I mean, there's a hotel that's haunted and drives a guy crazy. It's all pretty standard affair. But between the obvious scares and unsettling moments, there is the same through line, the same horror of love that we see in the body. The Shining is about the Torrances. Apologies for, I'm gonna recap The Shining now, in case you forgot what happened in The Shining. This is just the format of the video, and you now have to sit through me recapping The Shining. One of the most famous movies of all time. Okay. Jack, his wife Wendy, and their son Danny. Jack gets a job as the caretaker for the Overlook, a secluded hotel in the mountains of Colorado, during its winter season when it will be empty and they'll likely get snowed in. Jack is a recovering alcoholic and a writer. He took the job at the Overlook in part to aid his recovery and in part to have a quiet and unobtrusive place to finish his novel. The main job to be done at the Overlook is to turn the boiler down every day to prevent it from exploding. And based on that, I'm pretty sure you've already worked out how the book ends. What King also tells you at the start of the book is that the last caretaker went crazy and killed his family with an axe when they got stuck there in the winter. So by that point, you almost certainly know how the book is going to end, but there's still 500 pages left. When Danny was younger, Jack broke his arm when trying to reprimand him for messing with his papers. This was the catalyst for him to stop drinking. In the book, this incident haunts Jack. Every time he feels anything somewhat negative towards Danny, he thinks about it and worries that he'll do it again. As well as this, just before the start of the novel, Jack was fired from his teaching job after he almost beat a student to death for slashing his tires after Jack cut him from the debate team. Jack is a violent person, and he always was, even before the Overlook. The book suggests that this stems from his abusive father, who he only lost favor with when he beat his mother to the point of hospitalization. But because of that, Jack is intensely aware of the effect his violence and temper have on his family. He's just unable to control it. The important thing with Jack is that he isn't a wholly terrible father. For the most part, he's actually a pretty good dad. Danny loves him, intensely loves him. In many of Wendy's sections, she mourns how much Danny prefers him to her, and Jack loves Danny. More than anything in the world, he loves Danny and Wendy. At one point, Jack is watching Danny look at a road map and feels a wave of nearly desperate love for the boy. At the start of the book, Danny, with his Shining, can feel the love between Wendy and Jack as a tangible thing. Jack's love for his family is fact. It's there, and it's there in goddamn droves. I don't mean to hammer this in too much, but it's so important you know how much Jack loves his family. It's imperative. To not include it in an adaptation would be to tell a different story. And it's particularly important that you know how deeply Jack loves his family, because the other thing you know is that he's going to try to kill them. Here, we're left in a similar position to the body. Part of the horror of The Shining is in this fact, that Jack loves his family as much as he does, and you always know, that his love won't protect them from himself. He can love them and he can try to kill them anyway. More horrific than if Jack was simply an evil person who did evil things, Jack is a loving person who did evil things. The horror of The Shining isn't that we have to love people who are doomed, but that loving someone won't stop you from being the one to doom them. The Shining was, of course, written about Stephen King's own experience with alcoholism and drug addiction. The Overlook possessing Jack is what pushes him to attempt to murder Wendy and Danny, but that was kind of in there all along. And this is all just a pretty obvious metaphor. But the thing is that in The Shining, Jack's love actually saves almost everyone. The only person who loses their life is Jack himself. In a moment where Jack has a prime opportunity to kill Danny, he snaps out of his possession and instead tells Danny that he has to run and that he loves him. Danny kisses his hand and tells him it will all be over soon. Danny eventually escapes, him and Wendy saved by Dick Halloran, who would come back to the Overlook at Danny's call. The hotel blows up with Jack inside. He forgot to turn the boiler down that day. So what can we take from this? Jack's love did in fact save Danny and Wendy, but it's kind of also what put them in danger in the first place. Maybe love had nothing to do with it. I think it's sort of a mix of everything. Love won't stop you from doing awful things to the people your love is directed at, but it might protect them. It is cruel and kind all at once, and maybe regardless of all of this, it has to be coveted. Dick tells Danny in the epilogue, set the summer after the Overlook blew up. That's your job in this hard world. To keep your love alive and see that you get on, no matter what. And doesn't that just sum it up? So looking at both The Body and The Shining, I think we can pretty much build a general philosophy for King regarding love and horror. King pretty much subscribes to the idea that tragedy is best served in contrast to joy. These stories are, yes, about people who were doomed from the beginning and had no hope of winning. But this would mean essentially nothing if they didn't have something to lose. Despite their doom, these characters love each other, and that's what makes their doom sad. King's work isn't horror containing love, it's horror built on love. The Shining isn't scary because a man tries to kill his family, it's scary because a man who tries to kill his family also loves them. The same way that The Body isn't scary because Chris dies. It's scary because Gordy's love for him got Chris so far and then he died anyway. Without the love, these stories would likely feel flat. They wouldn't really be very scary at all. They wouldn't feel haunting or traumatic to read. They would just be stories. Though the average King book is eventually about love, somehow in some small way saving the day, the horror of them is that it fails to help anyone a million times before that. I think that's why, even though there aren't any scares and the bad things that happen are comparatively tame, The Body makes me feel sadder and more scared than anything else I've ever read or watched. I mean, it's visceral. I wrote most of the script for this in various cafes and parks, and I had to take frequent breaks when writing this section on The Body so that I wouldn't start crying in public. This just sort of fundamentally wouldn't work without the love. The love is all of it, all of the joy, all of the terror, it's all in there. And though The Shining gets slightly more complicated, fundamentally the same is true there. So, what does Aster think of this?
My mom was old, and she wasn't altogether there at the end. And we were pretty much estranged before that, so it really wasn't a huge blow. But I did love her.
No, I couldn't find a physical copy of Beau is Afraid. I have Midsommar, and that is going to have to do. I actually quoted Hereditary earlier in the video in the section on The Body, when I described the characters as pawns stuck in a horrible, hopeless machine. This is said at the start of the film as a student's response to the question of whether a story is more tragic if there was never any hope in the first place. It's no secret what Ari Aster is trying to get at with this film. Hereditary is about a family, one with a history of severe mental illness after the death of the grandmother Ellen and later the daughter Charlie. Ellen was in a cult that worshipped King Paimon, one of the 72 demons of hell. Annie, the protagonist, Ellen's daughter and Charlie's mother, had kept her first child Peter away from her mother because of their estrangement. though she had softened on this by the time they had Charlie, which allowed Ellen to sink her hooks in, as Annie says. Ellen made Charlie the vessel for King Paimon, though this wasn't ideal because Paimon prefers a male host. When Peter is trying to drive Charlie to the hospital because of an allergic reaction, she dies via decapitation, in a way that was probably in some way preordained by the cult, though we never get concrete confirmation on this. Anyway, the spirit of Paimon is now loose, essentially. Annie is found by one of Ellen's cult friends who takes advantage of her grief and shows her how to summon Charlie's, and by extent Paimon's, spirit. Annie falls for this and Paimon proceeds to haunt the family, eventually taking control of Annie and driving Peter to knock himself out and finally provide the male host that Paimon wanted and that the cult can worship. The way the demon's spirit moves between the family members as a result of Ellen's interference, as well as the title of the movie, pretty much gives away the metaphor. The characters in Hereditary are doomed not because of an outside force, but because of who they are. Because they are a family. It would be easy to mistake this for essentially a play on the same kind of story as The Shining. Annie in Hereditary also has a history of violence, at one point admitting to having tried to set her children and herself on fire while sleepwalking, and later to trying to miscarry Peter in order to, as she says, save him. This is very different from The Shining, though, isn't it? Though Annie's attempted murder haunts her similarly to Jack breaking Danny's arm, what Annie did is more severe, more intentional, though it's all, to an extent, subconscious. Jack's abuse of Danny isn't out of love. Love simply doesn't prevent him from doing it. But Annie's attempted killing is fueled by her love for her children. She didn't want Peter to be born because she thought it would be better for him. Her trying to burn him and Charlie isn't just a murder, it's a murder-suicide. She believes it will be better for them to be dead. She's trying to love them by sparing them the lives they're destined for. There is no warmth in Hereditary. All interaction between the family is either cold, strained, or actively hostile. Though Annie constantly reaffirms that she loves her mother and she loves her family, this isn't really shown to us in any meaningful way other than her attempts to kill them. Peter obviously doesn't accept this love. He asks his mother why she hates him, and her pleas that she was trying to help fall on deaf ears. At one point after Charlie's death, Peter is smoking with his friends and has a panic attack. He desperately asks someone to hold his hand, and we don't see if anyone does. When Annie is fully possessed, she chases Peter into the attic. He crouches over the hatch he's trying to break into and pleads to her, calling her mommy, asking her to stop, apologizing over and over. Peter spends the movie constantly searching for love, and the tragedy isn't that love won't protect him, but that he'll never find it. At least he'll never find a version of it that won't kill him. Aster manages to make this feel just as tragic because we spend the movie kind of led to believe that the love is there, at the very least. It's a while in when we find out about Annie trying to kill her children. It's even further in when we learn about her trying to have a miscarriage. The lack of love isn't self-evident as much as it kind of creeps up on you. This works in part because we're so trained on stories like King's, where the doomed tragedy works in contrast with the love. So the idea that it was never really there is unexpected. You're so far in when you realize that no one is ever finding the love they're looking for in this movie that it still feels like a loss. If it was immediately obvious that the love wasn't there, then the film wouldn't work as well, in my opinion. The tragedy is in the discovery, not contrasted with anything real, but instead an imagined hope. This worked particularly well in a story about family where love is kind of implied. It's essentially using the same effect as King's work, but pushing it slightly further. Aster is testing the bounds of when the absolute tragedy of it overwhelms any positives to the point where it stops being tragic and just becomes miserable. He widely succeeded doing this with Hereditary, and then he pushed it further.
Well, like she would give me lots of love.
Oh, I gave you lots of love. I'm sorry.
But if I didn't give it back to her in the exact same way, she saw it as me being not thankful and like trying to hurt her.
So the love was conditional.
Yes.
Ah, this is very good for you, Bo.
Beau's Afraid is a 3-hour relentless slog of misery and anxiety. Described semi-jokingly by Aster as a Jewish Lord of the Rings, but he's just going to his mom's house. Beau's Afraid is easily the harshest and least loving of anything I've talked about today, and also most other things. With reviews like, don't worry, the funny Ari Aster movie is still a 3-hour waking nightmare, and a 3-hour odyssey made for no one but the director, the movie was pretty divisive. After pestering everyone I know to watch it, my sister texted me one day saying, I must be about halfway through Beau's Afraid. I feel sick. I don't know if I can go on. It's so fucked up, and I feel anxiety through every second of it. If you think I'm wasting time by telling you all this, then you're right. I really don't want to recap Beau's Afraid. Mostly because I'm not even sure if that's a thing a person could realistically do in less than the actual runtime of the movie. Beau is trying to get to his mother's house. She's dead. He needs to get there to attend her funeral and memorial. She died after he missed his flight to see her the first time because his keys and luggage were stolen, and he got locked out of his apartment by hordes of, to quote the Wikipedia summary, deranged homeless people who got into the building when he left to buy a bottle of water. Beau is stabbed, drugged, attacked, bullied, accused of causing all of these terrible things that have happened to him. And at the end of it all, he gets to his mother's house, and she's not even dead. She faked her death because Beau didn't love her enough. Also, she's been watching everything he's been doing, and his therapist has been telling her every bad thing he says about her in therapy. The film ends with Beau, a moment after thinking he's finally escaped, in a coliseum filled with people jeering as his mother announces his flaws to them. His boat tips and he drowns, and the credits roll as people file out of the coliseum and the cinema simultaneously. This is barely scratching the surface of the horrors in Beau is Afraid. It's not really relevant enough for me to get into what's going on with his father, Elaine, and his twin, but trust me, none of it is any less bleak. The world of Beau is Afraid is comically cruel, a sickening mirror of a nightmare where the world is really out to get you personally. Everyone is talking about you behind your back, and they don't have anything nice to say. Beau is Afraid imagines a world where you deserve the torment. You deserve the sneers as you die, because the world was built for your torture. Obviously, this is probably the hardest film for me to argue fits the model I'm suggesting here. Beau is Afraid is careful to never really suggest hope. Once you're halfway through, you pretty much understand that nothing is going to start going well for this guy anytime soon. But you're told implicitly and repeatedly that Beau's mother loves him. She loves him a lot. And for most of the movie, you think she really died. She was this somewhat loving thing taken away from him. Because everything is taken away from him. The truth of the film is revealed slowly, piece by piece by piece. Every new terror giving way to an even worse one that I, at least, never fully caught on to suspecting. When Beau sails away at the end of the film, there's this singular moment where you think he actually got away. And the things he did actually mattered in some way. And then, of course, you realize it was all just another orchestration. All by his mother's design. Her suffocating grip, which he can truly never escape. But there was a moment when you thought he might. There's a moment when he's in her house and still thinks she's dead, and it's peaceful. Maybe the only seconds of peace in the whole movie. Those moments where Mona is dead and Beau is in her house alone. Point is, this does end up being like Hereditary. Despite its resolute bitterness, it makes the overwhelming horror work, because it always finds a lower depth. Aster suspends you in one horror, then pulls the rug and drops you so far that the first horror feels like love. Are you fucking kidding me? Why is there an advert on my 24-hour fire video? Aster suspends you in one horror and then pulls the rug and drops you so far that the first horror feels like love. Because at least it isn't what we have now. There is love in Beau is Afraid, but it is toxic and bitter and not really love at all. Every scrap of love or hope that we get is later retracted, pulled away by a new context. And that lets Aster define the tragedy in its contrast still. For all Beau is Afraid is essentially a misery slog, it doesn't start and end in the same hell. There's a staircase of misery that stops itself from feeling redundant by fondly looking back when the horror was only getting locked out of your apartment and being stabbed in the street. This comes from the same foundation as everything else I've talked about. It just goes much further with it. For a lot of people, this doesn't really work, and the film is too horrible and miserable for the horror to feel rewarding. But if you're open to it, then it's an excellently deranged pushing of the envelope that I have absolutely no desire to ever watch again. Ari Aster's films are kind of unforgivingly bleak. He uses the audience's hope against them, suggesting that things might just get better if you keep watching, or at the very least that they couldn't possibly get any worse, even though you already know they will. It's interesting, right? Because his characters are all stuck in these miserable cyclical systems where their fate is predetermined and nothing will save them. But we care about them anyway. Maybe because all of Aster's characters are still searching for love. None of them ever truly believe that they are unloved until the end, where we and they realize that there was never really any hope of being loved after all. This works because we know how Stephen King operates. Everything Aster does is in conversation with this pretty age-old idea of contrasting tragedy and love. Everyone is familiar with that Tumblr post I keep almost paraphrasing about the love not saving anyone, but being present and mattering anyway. And it's this cultural consensus that allows Aster to keep pulling his favorite trick, where the love was never there to begin with. In this way, Aster's horror is kind of equally about contrasting with expectations as it is contrasting with love. But still, the love is what gives this impact. Aster's rug pull would be all well and good if it was just subverting expectations for the sake of it. What makes it truly horrifying is what is being pulled out from under you. I think a lot of people's worst nightmare is realizing that no one loves them. We cling to love in a way that Ari Aster reads as desperate and perverse. To take any hope of that away suddenly is what makes his films truly sickening. That you can want for something so fundamentally, so badly, only to realize you never had a chance of grasping it. That would be pretty horrifying. And this is what Ari Aster is doing to you with the most universal desire of all. Ooh. King and Aster's philosophies here are opposites, but they're opposites of the same thing. More like baby blue and navy than blue and red. It would be easy to suggest that what Aster is doing is more advanced in some way, but I hesitate to refer to writing in that way. What King does has been done by thousands of other people, but very few have the same grasp on it that he has. His books are often perfectly constructed to contain this kind of horror on the same level as any monster he comes up with. To the extent that the body is terrifying without ever containing anything scarier than a big dog. Without King's work and the work that he inspired, I don't know if what Ari Aster does would work. At the very least, not to the same extent. While it is, for the most part, wholly its own thing, the cultural knowledge of tragedy and love perfectly sets up the audience for what Aster is doing. He knows this, and he is capitalizing on it. I'm not in any way suggesting that King invented this, but he's responsible for popularizing it in the way that he's responsible for popularizing hundreds of modern horror concepts. He's fucking Stephen King. They feed into each other, is what I'm saying. King and Aster are doing the same thing in very different ways, and based on the work I'm including in this video, in very different times. King still writes, but in a present where he's more interested in crime novels than outright horror, Aster feels like not quite a successor to King, but a step further into the darkness. Hi, don't get scared. Don't get scared. This is in case you got a little spooked when the lights went out there. Scary. But don't worry, this was filmed in the middle of the day, during a comedy festival, so you're in good hands. It's fine. Don't get scared. I know you're terrified right now. Don't be. You know, if you liked the video, it would be really sick if you pressed the button that says I liked the video. There's a button for this now. Everything, there's a button. Other buttons include, there's a button for if you want to see more videos that I make. It's just subscribe. It's red. I think it's still red. It might be white now. You can never tell these UI changes. You can subscribe to me. You can like the video. You could even tell your friends. You can write a little comment if you hated it or if you loved it. You can just write in the comments, say, you know, whatever your heart desires. You know, I'm not monitoring that, so you could say anything. I mean, don't say bad things, but you know, I couldn't stop you. What would I do about it? I'd just fucking sit there and suffer in silence. So yeah, that's the video. I hope you liked it. I hope you had fun. Hope you didn't get scared. And that's it. Go about your day now. Thank you. Thank you. Please press all the buttons I just told you to press. If you've forgotten them, I'm not gonna repeat them, but bye. Thank you. Bye.